Hey guys, it's Jordan, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to make Klangkuenstler style hard melodic rave techno. We're going to be talking about the style where it's got the nice, powerful, hard techno bass, but also with some cool melodic stuff on there, kind of a bit more dreamy, a bit more Blade Runner-esque. As usual, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available at the top of the description on my Bandcamp. If you like what you heard in the intro and you want to follow along and get a great template and some samples to work with, definitely consider picking that up. It's just $5 and it really helps support me. And yeah, let's get started. Alright, so here's the project file. The first thing up here is the kick. So as you can hear, it's a nice, fat, hard techno kick, and it's pretty much just a straightforward rumble, but there's a little bit more work that goes into it to really get it to be the right kick for the style. So the first layer is just, of course, the kick, which is dry. This one's really about, like, just having a really great sample that you created and kind of letting that shine. Or even if you're using something just straight out of a sample pack, like, you really just want to get, like, a good kick and let it breathe. Don't do too much extra stuff. There's a little bit of group processing, but other than that, like, it's just about getting the right sample and really studying the tracks and kind of, like, getting to understand what makes those kicks work so well and then recreating that yourself. And then we have, underneath that, the rumble. So this is a pretty straightforward sort of rumble, but there's a little bit of work to it to kind of like make it really sound proper. So what's happening here is we have just the kick actually, literally just playing quarter notes. Like if I turn off all these effects, it's the same as the kick above. And then it's going through a delay, which, like I said, this is kind of like a more standard thing you would do to make a rumble. But then on top of that, we're also adding a reverb. And you can hear that makes that sound like that. So it adds a lot of life to the rumble. And obviously, like, we're not really going to be hearing too many of those, like, higher frequencies. But if you pay attention to the low end, you can hear it's a lot bigger and more full sounding when you have the reverb and the delay together. So this is, like I was saying, it's a straightforward rumble. It's the type of rumble that you've seen me make a million times. But then doing these little tiny things, like using a short reverb on top of the delay, or like, maybe you might tweak the delay so it's like down in eighth notes, like that. These little tiny things that you can do with this same process that is used a lot. Essentially, these little tiny things are going to be how you can make it your own and how you can make unique ones. Again, like every time, it's pretty much going to be the same thing, right? But like doing these little different things each time to make it a little bit different. And ultimately, this doesn't sound the same as every other rumble kick, so it's fine. Then we just have a low pass. So that's getting just the rumble. Then we're side chaining it to the kick. And the last thing here is just converting it to mono, because you never want your rumble to be stereo. You can have like the bass mono, like this, and maybe make like certain frequencies mono and then still have some stereo, but you want to make sure like everything below like 250 hertz at least is going to be mono. And then on the group of the kick and rumble together, we have a bit of processing. So you can see we have returned to the glory days. I'm using drum bus on the kick and bass group again. The secret to this one, though, is you'll notice there's not too much of it, actually. We got the dry wet on 20%. So, the thing about using drum bus on your kick and your rumble is it's a really good way to glue them together, right? Because the saturation kind of fills in some of those harmonic spaces and brings them closer together. The problem with that is that as good as that can sound, as much as it can hit hard, you can really get it sounding like glued and tight like that. It's also going to make your kick kind of messy, and it's going to introduce a lot of stuff that's going to make it just muddy and kind of like ruin the kick, so to speak. Like it's going to take it away and make it not quite the same level of fullness as you would get with the dry kick. Even though you are adding this processing that's making it fatter, it still is like, it can mess it up. So that's why we have this on 20% here. Now we're just kind of using this as like a layer to make the kick fatter by having more sound, rather than like, okay, you just turn the saturation on and crank it up and that makes it sound fat. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. Here's without the drum bus. Now the key to this is without the drum bus, it's still a really good kick, right? Like it still has to work and be really strong without the drum bus. But then when we add that, again without it, so yeah, that's the idea there. You want to think of this more as like a layer that you can make it sound fatter by just having an extra layer on there essentially, rather than like, okay, we're going to bring the saturation onto it, and yeah, that's just going to get a little bit too messy if you try to do a lot of saturation without blending it with the dry signal. And then we just have an EQ8 here, cutting at 26 hertz, just cutting out like those low frequencies that you wouldn't really be able to hear. Kind of making the bass a bit more airy, but still of course leaving in the actual low end. And yeah, then we have the hi-hats, which this one's pretty straightforward. So it's this layer, and then this more like mid-rangey one. Just getting like the best of both worlds here. You can see the first one has a little bit of reverb as well. And yeah, this one, you'll notice like it's not really about the processing. The processing is kind of arbitrary. It's really just about getting a hi-hat that's going to have that same kind of aggressive, like crunchy feel like we're going for with the rest of the drums. And that doesn't really come with processing. That comes with starting with samples that already kind of have the vibe that you want. And then the processing just kind of flavors it a little bit. You know, it's like, you can't take like a poor quality steak or a poor quality piece of fish and put some really good spices on it and hope that that's going to make it taste good, because it's still going to be a bad cut of meat, or it's still going to be like some cheap whatever. So you need to start with something really good, and then like I said, the spices on top of that are going to make it better, but the spices can't save it. So yeah, and then after that we have this clap snare. So this is that classic sort of like very 90s, 2000s style of clap slash snare. And the way this is made is we're using the two 909 samples. We have the clap and the snare, and then we're layering them together. So you're getting that nice like and also the and right off the bat, that without any of the processing alone is kind of doing a lot of it. Like if you listen, it's just a very fat sample where you play these two together. Obviously, it's turning down a lot, but if I turn it up. And then what we're doing is we're distorting them together. And then the secret here is that you'll notice I have two distortions to get the sound. Like, a lot of times you have to really push it. Like, you can't just put a little bit. Like if we get rid of this overdrive, you'll see, like, it's not enough with just the pedal. Like, that is getting there, but that's not really going to do it compared to that. So we have the two distortions, and you need two to get the sound. But then the secret is that we have the reverb in the middle. Because if I put the reverb before the first one, it would be too much. And if I put the reverb after the distortions, you actually wouldn't really hear the reverb that much, like in the whole mix. Because it's not really getting like pushed up the same way the rest of the sound is. So yeah, this distortion is just kind of like a nice way of doing that. Having it go into one of the distortions, but still it just goes into one of them without any reverb. And the last thing on there is just a little high pass filter. Then we have these Rave loops. So these are like the classic sort of like Rave percussion loops like you hear in a lot of these tracks. You can see these are also really not about the processing. It's about getting like 2 or 3 of them like this that can just fit really well together. Like we have this first one. You know, it's a lot brighter. And the second one's a lot more steady, and it's doing that like kind of more mid-rangey thing. And then when you put them together, there you go. Now the thing is, I think people think that making this style of techno is like 90% finding these Rave loops, and then 10% like actually making the track. But really, like when you listen to the whole track, if I get rid of these, there's actually not that much missing. Right, like the whole track is still pretty much the same thing. It might even be a little bit cleaner. But that's what those add. They add just like a lot of nice energy. But yeah, I think people really overblow like how important these are. Like, obviously, you know, they're cool. They have a nice vibe to them. But finding them and like using these, that's not really gonna make or break your track. Like, these are important, but I just think that, like, again, everybody puts a lot of effort into like, oh man, gotta like find the perfect classic ravey loop or else it's not gonna work. And like, really, you know, this might only be 10% of the track. And then the other thing over here, these little reverses, you'll notice I have another one actually underneath them, just for that. So this is a simple thing, but this is like a popular way to make a fill with this style of techno. You just take these one bar before the drop, and then they're just reversed. And then the last thing to that is actually this little tape stop here. So I have these all in a group, so they can all get that same tape stop. And what this is we're using the echo to create that like tape winding down effect. And it's really easy. So all you have to do this is just 2 automations. So you're going to turn the filter off on the echo, and then we're automating the dry wet to just come on, like right there. So essentially it's just turning on. And then while that's happening, the time is just going up like that. So it's a really simple effect, but now you get that nice right before the drop. Then we have the ride, which like pretty straightforward stuff there. Just a nice like techno 909 style ride, a little bit lower pitch, and then I have it being high passed. Then we have these stabs. So these are just a couple of kind of like ravey techno stabs. The first one here is made with wavetable. You can see it's just like some detuned saw waves with a bit of unison, and then some EQ and reverb and drum bus. And the second one is just like this classic, I'm pretty sure it's like the T99 stab. Got it going through some reverb. But these just kind of add a bit of flow. Like if you listen, just having that like every bar, it just jumps off of the kick like that. You can hear it's adding a lot of nice flow to the track. Even in the break there. Then the next thing we have here is the bass, which sounds like this. So the pattern for this is really simple. It's this like kind of dark G minor scale where we're doing the root note, the 6th, and then the 4th. Very simple musically, but it gives you this cool kind of like anthemic chord progression that sits really well underneath all this other stuff. And then for the sound on this one, it's made using a few layers actually. You can see we have 3. So the first one is just a nice like kind of detuned unison bass inside of Serum here, or inside of Wavetable. You can see, yeah, it's just 2 saw waves detuned with some unison, and then I have it going through my width rack to make it a bit wider. And then we're layering that with this. Just 1 saw wave. Which is because when you put that 1 saw wave that doesn't have unison over top of the unison saw waves, it gets really fat. And this is kind of the secret too. Like to make these kinds of basses, you're not always going to be able to get it with just 1 synth patch. A lot of times it's like multiple things that are detuned, like the way like we have unison there, but then we also have the detune on the oscillators. But then like here, it's really flat. So you're hearing those kind of clash. A lot of the sound is going to come from that rather than just making one magically super fat bass synth patch. But you'll notice those alone aren't quite that full sounding just yet. So then we have this analog layer, which just fills out the rest of that. And all this is a pulse wave. We have, yeah, you can see the square wave here. And then I have the pulse width being modulated with an LFO. And there's the amp envelope, and then we should have a bit of vibrato. And then again, you put that underneath the other ones, and it fills the sound out. We don't have to have any saturation or any, like, you know, anything that's going to mess the sound up, because we just have a really fat sound coming out of the synth. And that's really what you want to aim for. And then we have this high pass filter, which is really just to cut out the lows. You can see it automates here going into the drop, so it's a little bit more impactful. But yeah, with this, obviously, like to make it blend with the rumble, you gotta make sure you high pass it. And you wanna do what I'm doing right here, where like you solo the rumble and this bass, and make sure that they're working. Because like if I put that filter down a little bit lower, you'll notice it's a tiny detail, but it's going to make a world of difference in terms of just being able to actually hear the rumble in your track. And that's just being sidechained to the kick. I have a low pass filter as well to kind of bring that up. And then we just have that same echo happening there right before the drop. And yeah, then we have the string. So what's happening here is really, it's not really following like any one particular progression. I mean, I guess you can say it's like that progression, but really what it's doing is we have our like really steady chord progression happening, and then the idea is this is kind of like a counter melody, right? Like it's meant to be sort of contrasting against that chord progression you're hearing from the bass line, but still all notes that are in the same key that are going to fit with it, so that you get this really beautiful kind of epic thing happening. And you can hear those make that chord progression work better. And that's really what you want with this. Like the idea is that when you play this with your main chords, it's going to make those main chords sound better rather than taking away from them. Like if you're playing this, if you're soloing these two together and your main chord progression is getting kind of covered up by this, then you need to fix it. But in this case, it's like just trying to make something, like I said, that's going to make the chord progression look even better. And there's little tricks to do that too. Like for example, like here, the bass line goes like down like that. But you'll notice that this is going up there. So it's like little tiny things like that to just make it really move off of that main chord progression. And the sound on this one's pretty simple. So we're using the string. It's just a sample, and the sampler here, I've got it being looped, so that it's just really continuous and it keeps going forever with the fades. And then we have some reverb. I have this Haas effect on here to spread the sound out. It just kind of makes it a bit wider. There's without it. And then with it. Then we just have a little bit of saturation, as well as this EQ8, which is cutting out the lows. I have a compressor, which is sidechaining into the kick. And then I have another high-pass filter there, which is a bit superfluous, but sometimes like the sidechain can add some weird stuff. And then I have this low-pass here, which you'll notice the way this break works is it's kind of like dropping down, like disappearing. And then once the drop comes, that's when it all comes back full force. Then we have our lead. So this is kind of going off of this little movement here where it's going from D to D sharp. Now the thing is, this isn't actually the root note, right? Because we're in the key of G minor. So what it's doing is it's bouncing between the 5th and the 6th in the root. But then you're also getting these like all those little things. And then what's happening here is you can see we also have like these little slides. So that kind of goes into the synth patch as well. I'll explain that in a moment. But really, like, just having the combination between the like that chord progression and then what's happening with the lead. Again, it's all about like how this is gonna fit over top of that. Now, for the actual synth sound on this one, it's made using wavetable. So you can see that we have this patch where it's a square wave as well as a saw wave. And then what's happening is they're detuned quite a bit, going into a low pass filter with an envelope to make it more plucky. And then we have that glide there. That's how we're doing like those like. It's a really subtle detail, but having those glides in there, I think really makes this like a lot more exciting and kind of like more textured and fluid. And we also have a bunch of unison on that. You can see it's on the noise setting. Then we just have some echo and some reverb. I have a bit of multiband distortion as well, where we're splitting the sound into the highs, the mids, and then the lows. And then you'll notice, kind of like I was saying with the saturation on the kick, we're kind of blending this. Like you'll see the dry wet on this amp here is at 50%. Because all the way up, like that's too much. You wouldn't want that. But this way you're still getting that nice sound with just a little bit of distortion on top. And then same deal with the highs with this pedal. Here's without the audio effect track. Like it's good. It's just not quite that same lead. And this just gives it that extra bit of texture to really sound more full and better. And then finally, we just have this being sidechained to the kick. And the last layer down here is the synth Atmos, which sounds like this. So the idea behind this one is we have like a lot of notes going. We have like two little patterns happening here in MIDI, and then it's going into this really long echo, which kind of creates like this atmospheric thing. So what's happening here is, like I said, you can see, so the two patterns are this, and then this. And you can hear those two rhythms play off each other really nicely. But it's two really simple arps. So that's kind of how you want to think about that. You create that, and then what happens is then we're putting that into this like really long echo here, which is at a really slow time, but it's got a lot of delays. And then now it just creates this like long, endless sort of synth riff. And yeah, it's just a nice way to create that like background kind of like nice musical stuff. Like if I play everything musical without this, obviously it's pretty good. But listen to it when we add this. You know, there's just a certain like thing there that we're not getting without it, that I think makes this sound really good. And for the actual sound on this one, it's just two saw waves going into a low pass filter with an envelope on it, and then we have the amp envelope set up like that. And then just have a bit of vibrato, a bit of unison as well, and then the echo obviously, some drum bus, and then this low pass filter, which is just for transitioning it. And yeah, again, just like a background layer, but it's gonna make a huge difference with the chord progression. Yeah, so that's gonna be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get this full project file, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available right at the top of the description. And if you're Patreon or Patreon, check there. Thank you so much to everybody who goes to pick up the sample pack. Again, it really helps support me. I don't make a whole lot just off of YouTube, but with these little $5 sample packs, I'm able to keep going and keep bringing you guys awesome new content like this every day. And yeah, thank you so much for the support, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.